Here's the thing about writing a 7-part book series that no one ever tells you. Eventually you have to go back to book 1 and realize it was written by a completely different person. A person who had no idea what she was building. That is where I am right now. And March was the month that I chose to sit with that, figure out what I was actually going to do about it. But first, let's talk about the good news, because we love good news around here. On March 6th, I finished the first draft of Between the Vines. I followed my normal pattern of word vomiting that first draft and then setting it aside to work on something else. For some reason, writing Between the Vines did actually become a really big chore, mostly because of some side stories that took a lot out of me. So finishing it was a huge win. That book is something that I am very excited about and cannot wait to work on again later, but we'll talk more about that at a future update video. For right now, we're going to talk about March. Okay, so before we talk about how March absolutely humbled me as an author, let's back up because I need to fill you in if you're new around here. So last year I wrote a book called The Unwritten Rules of Hooking Up, which turned into a 7-part book series. It follows a group of people who become friends, kind of a found family dynamic, all centralized around a specific band. So early 2025, I actually finished the first draft of The Unwritten Rules of Hooking Up, that first book in the series. It was an office rivals to lovers story about 2 broken people who just didn't believe in love anymore. They believed in hooking up, but not love. At first, they didn't like each other very much, hence the rivals to lovers storyline. That ended up culminating into them hooking up with each other and finding love through that. And now come on, that's not a spoiler, it's a contemporary romance. What do you want from me? Here's where things got really, really complicated because I ended up really loving Peyton, the FMC in Hooking Up. I ended up really loving her best friend, Charlie. So much so that I decided that Charlie herself needed a book and I was going to give it to her, which then turned this into a duology. But it didn't stop there because, like I said, it's a 7-part book series. It ended up becoming book 3, then book 4, then book 5, then book 6, and of course then book 7. So suddenly 1 book became 7 books and I don't know what happened. 7 books from 1 standalone novel that I wasn't even sure at the time I wanted to actually even write. I do have a short form video that goes kind of through how the thought process works, so I'll go ahead and let you click that above here if you're interested in that. The point is, book 1 didn't know that it was the start of a series. And by the time I got to book 6, I realized I need to make it know that. It matters now. So I went into Hook Up's second draft thinking it was going to be relatively normal. I knew that there were going to be things I needed to add, but there are things I added to my books in other versions, like this one, Price Check on Love. I added a ton to that book in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th drafts. I had notes, I had a plan. And then I read the first chapter and went, oh no. Here's the problem with retroactively fitting a book into a series it was never actually supposed to be a part of originally. The characters who populate the rest of the series don't actually exist in the first book, aside from Charlie and Ethan, the MMC from book 2, at the very end. And that is it. There is this whole slew of characters that I introduce in book 2 that become incredibly important for the rest of the series, but don't exist in book 1, which means that the Unwritten Rules of Hooking Up feels completely disjointed from the rest of the series, aside from Charlie. And that's a continuity issue that just cannot be ignored. And then there was the second problem I came across as I started doing all of these first drafts. And that is, I go to the hate to love trope way too often in this series. Like, how many times can an enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers exist in one friend group before somebody actually says, hey, maybe we should all see therapists? Yes, these characters absolutely need therapy. Multiples of them. They're all broken people, okay? So basically, book 1 had 2 major problems that I needed to solve. The wrong trope dynamic and characters that needed to be introduced, even just subtly, slightly, into book 1 so that it feels more connected to the rest of the series. Okay, so here's how I decided to solve these problems. The first one was actually somewhat a bit easier because I could plan that as I was writing the other first drafts and start to weave that in to play with certain dynamic and see if that actually worked. So basically I needed to connect Hudson and Peyton to the other characters in some way, shape, or form outside of Charlie. So let's cover Hudson's connection first. As I was writing book 6, which such as the prelude to the Unwritten Rules, a prequel book, which should be read in the 6th book slot of the series, and those of you who've written series understand that. It takes place before the events of the rest of the series, where Rob and Max meet and fall in love, because they're pretty much the only, like, you know, sane couple in the series. So fitting in Hudson with Rob, who really is kind of disconnected from the band enough that he wouldn't be just hanging out all the time or already be well versed with the band when Charlie joins the band, I figured that might be a really good place to put him. So I made them college friends, making Hudson a secondary character in the prelude. And that honestly really worked. Their personalities were different enough that they contradicted each other quite a bit, but they also meshed together really well. So once I figured out that first thread, I was able to figure out Peyton's thread pretty quickly. Again, I wanted to connect her to the band in a way that wasn't Charlie. So within the band, there is one guy who does like to hook up as well. And so therefore I thought, hey, maybe those two have hooked up in the past and they stayed in maybe somewhat contact with each other, or at least enough within each other's orbit that they would mesh well together. Which means that there's going to be a decent amount of rewriting of the second book as well, because now Charlie would probably know that Peyton has had this previous relationship with Griffin when she joins the band anyway. That is a problem for future Brit to deal with. I do not need to worry about that right this second. So then the big one, the dynamic rewrite. I needed to change the entire trope of the book. I needed to change the entire dynamic between my two main characters. And that is a feat if you've never done it before. Hudson started out as this like unlikable Joey Tribbiani in a way. That was the idea behind Hudson initially. And Peyton didn't like that. Even though she also is part of hookup culture at the beginning of the book, well, throughout most of the book, at the same time, she didn't like the God's gift to women kind of man. They clashed at work very heavily. And this develops into a bet that they have with one another one night that leads to them ending up together. Well, I didn't want to go that route anymore. And not only that, but I did feel like that trope didn't feel very right anyway anymore. That was what I needed to resolve. One, because again, I go to the, hate to love well a little too much in the series, but also number two, honestly, I felt like it was kind of a weak storyline to begin with, and I wanted something that was a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more believable. So they're not rivals anymore. They're not two people who absolutely despise each other. They are two people who work together and are insanely aware of one another. They're actually quite friendly and have this office banter. It's basically them flirting, but not wanting to hook up with a coworker, therefore putting all their attraction towards each other into these games that they play at work. Who can finish the most work before the end of the day? Who can do this before the other? That kind of thing. So I set up this competitive nature between the two that's very flirtatious, very fun, very foreplay, if you will, which honestly feels more interesting and entertaining to me than what I had before. It was very two-dimensional. I hate you too. They both kind of suck and hate each other to the point of let's have this bet, and then of course they end up in bed together. That felt very two-dimensional. What I have now feels a little different, a little more fun. And all of this competitive nature at work is more like a pressure valve, them pushing away this thing that they refuse to name, which is attraction. So the challenge for this was not just adding scenes like it was for Price Check on Love or Deepwater to help you understand the characters or dive deeper into them. This was changing the entire romantic dynamic between two characters. This was a trope rewrite. This was a completely restructuring of Act 1. So every scene I touch has a ripple effect through the rest of the book. So by the end of March, I was about halfway done with this second draft, which is absolutely not where I wanted to be. I thought it would be at least almost done, if not done, with the second draft by the end of March. I remember even saying in the live stream with Kay, it might take me the rest of the month to finish this. What I didn't know at the time was it was going to take a lot longer than that. Here's what I'm actually honestly learning, and a good lesson for the rest of you as well who might be watching this writing a series. Don't rush it. Don't rush through a draft just because you want to fit it into a specific timeline. Every change I make has to be tracked and made note of so that I can also update that in books 2, 3, 4, and forward. If I move too fast, I end up introducing plot holes that I won't catch until it's too late, which is kind of the point of writing all the first drafts first. So halfway is where I need to be right now, and that's valid, and it's still moving forward. So while I was in the middle of this, a new video idea actually came to mind for me, because when I first started the series, I knew that I wanted to write the first draft of all of the books first. From the beginning, I wanted this book series to feel like one big book told in 7 different parts, essentially. So what am I doing? Writing the whole book first, meaning writing every one of the first drafts first. Now I know this sounds like somebody who's doing a lot of planning where it's gonna go absolutely nowhere. And trust me, it can feel like that sometimes. But at the end of the day, I think that this is what's going to make this series extremely strong. I ended up breaking that rule with hooking up, and only just because by the time I got to the 6th book, I had realized this series evolved in such a way that hooking up no longer worked. So before doing the final book, the epilogue book of the series, I wanted to go back and revisit Peyton and Hudson and make sure that their story was at least more sound on a structural level. But the philosophy behind writing all of the first drafts first still stands, and it's intentional. It's strategic. I'm gonna do a full video breaking down the strategy, why I'm doing it, the pros and cons to it, whether it still works for me or not. So if that sounds interesting to you, why don't you go ahead and hit subscribe if you haven't, because that video is on its way. Being planned literally right now. Well, not right now, I'm filming right now, but whatever, you get the point. So March, 1 draft finished, 1 draft half done, and way more complicated than I ever expected it to be. A series problem that I had seen coming, but decided to finally face here, right now, March of 2026, and a rewrite that is teaching me so much about being an author and also showing me how far I've come in just 1 year. Because I started the 2nd draft about a year after I finished the 1st, and I came a long way. So if you ask me how I'm feeling about my writing life right now, it's either deeply inspiring or deeply exhausting, depending on the day you ask. So if you are writing a series or thinking about expanding a book into one, let me leave you with this. Build your series Bible or the concept of your series sooner rather than later. Otherwise, you're going to end up like me and having to completely rewrite the first act of one of your books. Don't do it. It's hard. It's a lot of work. Also, I'd like to know what kind of author you are. Are you a draft everything first like me, whether it's even just one book, you draft the entire thing before even touching revisions, or are you a revising as you go kind of author? I'm very curious. Let me know in the comments. I know this is a very different kind of author update video. If you like this structure more than my previous ones, let me know that in the comments as well. And I will see you all next Thursday. Bye.